Hello there. A bewildered and appalled Boris Johnson has exited stage left. But there are still many people out there who believe in him and believe that he'll be back on the Tory stage with a stunning encore. But I'm not so sure. Interesting. Nigel Farage has been talking to people close to Boris about some sort of centre-right get-together. But when he was talking to Camilla Tominey on GB News this morning, he was keeping his cards very close to his chest. But the message seemed to be that if they were to take this hypothetical thing forwards, then it would take a good number of household names, as well as Boris and Nigel himself, to make it a success. Nigel also said that the Tories have now lost some very significant donors. I wonder where they'll be sending their money now then. But it sounded to me like if Boris wants to play ball, he'll be pushing at an open door. Anyway, that archetypal Marmite man, Boris Johnson, engenders just two reactions. People either love him or they loathe him. There doesn't seem to be any other responses out there. Maybe some forgotten tribespeople in a South American forest don't have a view, but they would be in a very small minority, alongside Michael Portillo. And Boris still has support amongst fellow Tory MPs, and they seem to be showing their mood by criticising the Privileges Committee that ditched him, and some by resigning. It was Nadine Dorries who resigned first on Friday, and then Nigel Adams yesterday, and both were Boris supporters. And the talk is that this is some sort of anti-Sunak plot, and that there may well be more. And if Rishi Sunak loses those subsequent by-elections, he could well be the next Tory leader booted out of number 10 by his fellow MPs. Is this the revenge of Boris? Now, Brexiteer Tory MP Jacob Rees-Mogg said that he is totally unaware of any such plot. And the press says, if it was a plot, it has now fizzled out. Now, there is no law or rule that says a by-election must be called, or anything that lays out timescales. Normally, the party that holds the seat starts the by-election process. But if there's a good reason, it could be delayed. But a political reason is not a good reason. Now, there is one extremely unlikely option open to the Prime Minister, and that is to name a date for the general election later this year and then delay all the by-elections until then, in the hope he can somehow recover his and his party's position in the meantime, with everyone knowing that would be a hopeless cause. So given he could delay a general election until January 2025, calling an early one now would, as I say, be extremely unlikely and suicidal. So he will in all likelihood just be forced to take the bad press as he loses by-election seats going forwards, using the old excuse that governing parties always, or nearly always, lose by-elections. Now, Boris is a big political beast, but where does he go now? And can he really make a comeback? A Tory comeback? Especially in the face of a YouGov poll indicating about 2/3 of voters believing he broke even more lockdown rules. Something that indicates that maybe 2/3 of voters are now not very happy with Boris. And while he's PM, Rishi Sunak will do all he can to prevent Boris getting back into the Commons anyway. There's even talk of Boris having his parliamentary pass revoked, a pass that all former MPs are entitled to. and if that happens, he will join the former Speaker John Bercow, who had his pass removed for life. Because the longer Sunak can keep Boris out of the political limelight, the more likelihood that a Boris threat would fade. Now, one Ramona Tory MP, Tobias Ellwood, laid into Boris on GB News with real venom, saying those who resign like him should be treated like mutineers and asked to leave the party, and at least be banned from standing in any future election. This could well illustrate the high level of anger aimed at Boris amongst Tories in general. So I don't see Boris ending up on a by-election candidates list any time soon. A Tory candidates list anyway. And that's where the speculation of a Boris Johnson, Nigel Farage Reform Party tie-up comes in. Because unless the former PM has a heap of juicy revelations to keep the press interested in him for some time to come, he might find it difficult to maintain a wide public presence, even if he does do a round of what would almost certainly be extremely well-paid public speaking events. I suppose Boris could go back to scribing political hit pieces for some news and current affairs outlet, even go back to The Spectator. But if he replicates his criticisms of the Tory leadership contained in his resignation letter there, then he might make it harder to get a stab at a safe Tory constituency seat. Because everyone would know that as soon as he got into the Commons, he would set about upsetting the Tory parliamentary party in order to pursue his sole aim of becoming leader again. And a lot of Tory voters will not forgive him for losing the Uxbridge and South Ruislip seat, probably to Labour. And Labour are probably also thinking they could take the Mid-Bedfordshire seat, vacated in a fit of pique by Nadine Dorries on Friday, even though at the last election Dorries enjoyed a 38% majority over Labour. And the Tories also had a 35.7% majority over Labour in Nigel Adams' former seat of Selby and Ainsty. The real upshot is that Boris has to keep himself firmly in the public eye if he wants to make enough of a stir to make any sort of comeback. Without that, memories will quickly fade and he will become yesterday's news. In fact, his resignation story might end up being far shorter than Philip Schofield's time on the front pages. And the Schofield story is already wilting as other news comes in. Now, Boris claims this is all a stitch-up, and given the makeup of the Privileges Committee that strung him up, I can quite believe it. In fact, I've compared that setup to a well-known marsupial that likes bent yellow fruit before now. And that committee will be meeting tomorrow to decide how it will deal with all those pesky Tory MPs that criticised its Boris report. Obviously, a wrong-think crime. And I gather that their report will still be issued on Monday to lay out their considerations and proposed sentence, despite it no longer being so relevant after Boris's resignation. And you can bet your bottom dollar that there will be those who support the report and those that call it a sham. And that story might run for a couple of days, but it's not something that Boris can campaign on for the next year, trying to pick up a safe Tory seat. Now, there are other routes to notoriety for Boris, such as writing a book maybe. I mean, he'll always find a publisher for his work, but that wouldn't cut the mustard at the basic political level that he would need. Then there's the Hancock route of getting a stint in the jungle maybe, or trying his hand at Strictly Come Dancing, or in a cookery competition maybe. Or he could become a presenter on one of the more right-leaning TV outlets like GB News. Or even go his own way on social media and maybe start his own dedicated YouTube channel. I bet he'd pick up quite a large following there. Yes, I think that's going to be his major problem, how to remain front and centre in the public eye, consolidating and gaining enough support for him and his vision to make him once again electable. Many believe he will be able to do this by just being Boris, but he would also have to woo the press, like the BBC, and one imagines that they might not be too minded to give him that much airtime unless forced. At the end of the day, I think the Boris days with the Tories are over. So if Boris does want to stay relevant in UK politics, he needs to do a couple of things. 1. Draw a line under Partygate by fully apologising. That might start softening up lost support. And 2, I think he will need to let the Tory strings go and get together with other big beasts on the right and either join a current or form a new political offering to the nation. So don't rule out a Farage-Johnson coalition with some other big names, paid for with money from disgruntled former Tory donors. And with the current Ramona makeup of Parliament, this could well be a battle for Brexit.